I thought, I'm looking at a Nazi war criminal. This is incredible.
Priebke had been one of the most important Gestapo officers in Rome during the war.
From all reports, he had a certain brutality and efficiency about him.
This guy is right up there with Mengele, with Eichmann.
What I felt in front of that man, it was hate.
We were hoping that we could confront a couple of Nazis in a German town in the Andes.
I've interviewed a lot of people who have committed crimes, and they usually run when they see someone like me.
Argentina. For half a century, a haven for Nazi war criminals. Until now. In a historic move, the government opens its post-war archives to the world.
One day in early 1994, at our program Primetime Live, someone said, why don't we do the story of how Nazi war criminals came to Argentina after World War II?
The story will lead one of America's most celebrated television news teams to the scoop of a lifetime, to one of the last remaining high-ranking Nazis still at large, SS Captain Eric Priebke.
With the greater liberalization of the Argentine administration, the old junta days had gone, new files were emerging that suggested that a lot of Nazis had indeed fled to South America and Argentina.
The stories that had been coming out at the time were that the Argentine government had been hiding something. Then I thought, okay, well, can I go down there and find a Nazi who's still alive, perhaps?
ABC News producer Harry Phillips is assigned the story.
I went down to Buenos Aires to poke through archives. I spent hours and hours by myself going through files. And sure enough, I found a lot of Nazis who we knew had traveled to Argentina. Adolf Eichmann, Joseph Mengele. The next task was to determine who was still a war criminal whose name I didn't have, who might still be in the file. We knew from the Simon Wiesenthal Center that there was a man in Argentina. He called himself Juan Mahler, but we suspected very strongly that he was a Nazi named Reinhard Kops, who we knew was a Nazi because there were records of him. All I needed to do was confirm that Juan Mahler was Reinhard Kops. Thanks to the Simon Wiesenthal Center, we knew that Juan Mahler was in Bariloche, living in hiding deep in the Andes in this small German town.
The Simon Wiesenthal Center is a Jewish human rights organization. What neither they nor ABC know is that Reinhard Kops, aka Juan Mahler, will lead them to a much bigger fish, the #2 man in Rome's Gestapo, Eric Priebke.
I worked with a woman in Buenos Aires named Dalila Herbst. I hired her as a translator and a fixer and to do research with me. And so we began asking questions.
Harry called me and asked me to go down to Bariloche to get in touch with a guy called Juan Mahler.
We knew that Kops was in Bariloche, and we also knew that Bariloche was a haven for German migrants. They built this German town in the Andes.
Bariloche is essentially an Austrian German alpine resort in Argentina. For many Germans and Austrians, Bariloche was a real home from home. The lakes were there, the mountains were there, the Germans were there, and a lot of them were Nazis.
Reinhard Kops and various other SS men settled in Bariloche. For these Austrian and German people, they felt like they were in Bavaria or in the Alps somewhere. They lived very openly. They went to the opera, they went to the cafes, they had their restaurants. For them, it was like a home away from home.
There were probably some covert toasts to Hitler's birthday there. I don't think it was an out-and-out sort of Fourth Reich, but I think certainly it was a place where a lot of former Nazis lived.
In Bariloche, I was quite afraid of asking who he was. I knew that he had a small hotel, and I called there and said if I could talk to Mr. Juan Mahler. And they said he rented this hotel to us, and they wouldn't give any sort of information. And then I began to try to see where I could get this guy. So I phoned his house, and a German woman told me, we don't know when he's coming back. So I said, well, this is going to be a hard work. I called Harry and said, we don't know when he's coming back.
After the war, Captain Reinhard Kops fled to Argentina, but not before helping thousands of his fellow Nazis escape the Allies.
Reinhard Kops was the spy. He was the man going around handing out landing permits to Argentina to his fellow Nazis. The rat line became the term used by the Nazis who were, running off the sinking ship of the Third Reich, seeking safety. The rat line ran from Germany into either Austria or Switzerland, from there to Italy, where they boarded ships to come to South America.
From his office in Rome, Kops handled thousands of Nazis on the run. Before long, he orchestrated his own escape to Bariloche, Argentina.
So I'm in contact with Dalila a lot. She stayed in Bariloche while I had returned to the U.S. for a time. I remember asking Dalila to check names out all the time, with the local community and so forth.
I was on my own there and absolutely bored. So I went down and asked somebody at the hotel if they could give me a list of books just to read and know the story of Bariloche. And between those books were one called The Painter of the Argentine Switzerland.
Maybe the book, A Local History, can shed light on the Nazi fugitives who've made this area home.
I went to the most important bookstore in Bariloche. I asked the man, and he said it disappeared. So I went to several bookstores that night, and it was exactly the same answer. The next morning, it was a beautiful day. So I went down walking, and there was a little kiosk. And there it was. I couldn't believe that. And I found at the beginning the story of Kops. And 3 pages later, there was a story of a man called Eric Priebke. It was very shocking for me.
Priebke had been one of the most important Gestapo officers in Rome during the war.
From all reports, he was very, very good at hunting down enemies of the state in Italy. And he had a certain brutality and efficiency about him.
Priebke had wide contacts with the Italian fascist, network in Italy, with priests in the Catholic Church.
When the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, Eric Priebke went on the run.
So Priebke knew he had to leave Italy. There was an active network of priests who were working, helping Nazis escape. The system for acquiring false documents was already in place.
In 1948, following the same rat line as Reinhard Kops, Eric Priebke and his family escaped to Buenos Aires. For 50 years, he has eluded justice, but now a team of journalists has stumbled onto his trail.
Every day we're on the phone talking about names. And finally, Dalila said to me, I think you might be interested in a guy named Eric Priebke. And I said, is that name on our list? She said, no, that name's not on our list. But I found his name in a bookstore, and I don't know if it's true, but this thesis talks about him being involved in some massacre in Europe. At first, I was a little skeptical, but after the second or third conversation we had on this, I thought, you know what, this sounds really promising. But is the guy alive? And she said, I don't know. And I said, well, find a phone book.
So I went and wanted to see if I could get his telephone number. And I just got, you know, a directory.
And sure enough, I brought the phone book home because in the phone book, she found him under his own name.
It was his name, Eric Priebke, his address, and his phone number.
Eric Priebke, except he had made one change. Instead of the H at the end of Eric, he was listed as E-R-I-C-O, Erico Priebke. It had to be the same guy.
So I called, and a German woman again got me on the phone and said, hold on a second. And when he came to a phone and said hello, I got afraid and hanged. I couldn't, you know, react.
He was alive and perhaps even a war criminal living in hiding deep in the Andes in this small German town. It really was a heart-stopping moment.
The ABC News team now hopes to expose not one, but two Nazis.
Well, we knew we were going to do a large story.
We had to do a total workup of research on Eric Priebke just to see if indeed this man was a war criminal.
Now, Argentina had admitted a huge number of Nazis after World War II. The exact number no one knows to this date.
Producer Harry Phillips returns to Bariloche. To stay under the radar, his team needs a cover story.
Dalila Herbst came in as a small businesswoman from Buenos Aires who was interested in perhaps moving to Bariloche and looking at business prospects. I was obviously going to be an American or a Canadian tourist. That's the only thing I could do and pull off. And I went out as a guy who was in town to do some fly fishing.
They focus first on tracking down Reinhard Kops.
Ultimately, I want to prove that Juan Mahler is Reinhard Kops. So I went to his house, and I just kind of surveyed the area myself. I did not knock on the door. I wanted to just watch him, but I didn't see him. After a few days in Bariloche, it became apparent to me that I might not see Juan Mahler. He hadn't come out of his house if he was in there. He hadn't gone to his business. I didn't know for sure if he was in town.
Phillips worries Priebke may have left town as well. He digs deeper into his past.
We had to find out if the allegations against Priebke were true. So we had to do a lot of research about his past in Nazi Germany. We were shocked with the results. We discovered records that showed that he was part of one of the worst atrocities, perhaps the worst atrocity that occurred in the country of Italy during the war. I thought, oh my God, this guy is right up there with some of the worst Nazi war criminals.
By 1944, Priebke was the Gestapo's second in command in Rome.
As the war was going very much against the Germans, there was increasing partisan activity. And one day in the spring of '44, 33 German soldiers were blown up by a partisan bomb.
They decided to kill 10 Italians for every Nazi who died. So that's 330 compared with 33 of the Nazis who were killed.
They had 24 hours to find the required number of people. And the Gestapo turn up and take away 335 people to be executed.
They should have had 330. They got 335. They rounded up 5 more than they should have.
Some of them were Jewish, some of them were children, some of them were very old men.
Some of them were Julius Piccichino's relatives.
When the German people came in the night, a trunk stopped in front of this house of my grandparents. And we see, in this night, there were 18 persons, and they putting them away.
Her grandfather, his sons, and his sons' sons, 3 generations are arrested.
They were driven up to the Ardeatine caves.
Eric Priebke was the guy standing outside the caves, checking the names off one by one.
They were led into these caves by SS men with their hands tied behind their backs in groups of 5.
The killing began at 3:30 p.m.
These victims would be lined up, and the SS officer would shoot them with one shot in the back of the neck, and the 5 would fall forward.
They asked to kneel, putting the head down. He killed him, only one shot.
Can you imagine inside this dark pit, bodies piling up, you know, the screams of men? It is horrible.
Then 5 more would come right behind them, and they will fall forward.
Priebke was there with his roster. However, he did more than that.
He was one of the first to set an example by killing 2 of the individuals who were killed in that massacre.
It was the most savage, vile reprisal.
And we had been working on this story for a couple of months now. We knew that we were at the point where we really had to get shooting. We were talking about Priebke and how we were going to pull this off. We were hoping that we could possibly confront a couple of Nazis in a German town in the Andes where war criminals had been living for 50 years. We want to see what he's doing today and to see what his life was like in hiding.
Delilah Herbst must trick the former Gestapo man into meeting her.
I have to go to my room and call him from my room, alone. I can't be with other people to call him.
Delilah Herbst concocted a story about herself being interested in opening up a delicatessen in Bariloche. By coincidence, he had apparently had some business like that.
And I told him that I had a friend who lived in Bariloche, and that my friend told me that he was a very intelligent businessman. I had to think about something nice to tell him.
So he agreed to meet with her.
On March 28, 1994, Delilah arrives at a cafe in Bariloche to meet the man they think is a Nazi war criminal.
And the goal was to check if Priebke was Eric Priebke.
We brought a cameraman down to Argentina and we began to do surveillance of Priebke. We wanted to get as much video of this guy today as possible. We had a camera that was a full-size videotape camera, and it was something that could not be concealed very easily. We had to take a bit of a gamble and expose ourselves a little bit.
We were afraid that something might happen.
Posing as a businesswoman, an ABC News researcher waits for the man she believes to be a war criminal.
We found a location in downtown Bariloche, across the street from a restaurant where Delilah Herbst set up a meeting with Priebke.
I had to take a coffee alone with Priebke, and I had to check that Priebke was Priebke.
She was presenting herself as a possible investor in a business in Bariloche.
It was not easy because they told me where I had to sit and where he had to sit.
Our cameras were across the street. We were in a kind of a stairwell, and we were one floor above the street. I remember worrying that Priebke would see us.
He looked like the most sweet and nice grandfather with his blue eyes and innocent look. And I began talking about war, and then I said, you know, my grandfather was born in Berlin, and his face changed. Berlin, he said. I'm from Berlin. I said, what a coincidence. And then I asked him, did you have to kill somebody in the war? And he said, no, because I was an officer in the German embassy in Rome. My coffee cup, you know, it was, you know, just running the coffee all over the, what a moment. I am an Argentine Jew. What I felt in front of that man, it was hate. I wanted to run away from that place. But, you know, I had to stay because I was working.
I thought, I'm looking at a Nazi war criminal. This is incredible. This man's been living in hiding, a free man, for 50 years after murdering 335 innocent civilians in Rome.
When I wanted to say goodbye, I just wanted to shake hands, and I put my arm this way, and he dragged and gave me a kiss in my cheek, and I said goodbye. It was very shocking for me, very shocking for me.
We learned about his involvement with the local German school, where he lived, the precise times at which he would go places. Very important strategic information for us to have. And he actually made a point of saying, I am punctual. I come out of the school at 12 o'clock noon exactly and walk home for lunch. I called New York and I said, I don't want to sound too certain of myself at this point, but I think we've got a big fish here.
Harry Phillips, the producer, kept briefing me, of course, on his progress. And there came a time when he said, I think we're ready to go down to Argentina. And he laid out what he had.
And at that point, we kicked into motion a plan to have Sam Donaldson come from Washington to confront Eric Priebke.
The ABC team has failed to find Reinhard Kopps. They decide to go ahead with the story anyway, hoping Eric Priebke won't get wind of them and vanish too.
I thought it was very important to bring Priebke to justice and to tell the story of this particular Nazi and what he did.
Sam Donaldson was the host of a weekend show in Washington. We really only had a couple of days during the week where we could have him in Bariloche or in Argentina at all, for that matter. So we had to get him to Bariloche on a private jet. It was one of those rarefied moments where I'm putting down an American Express card to spend $10,000 for a private jet to fly deep into the Andes. We were very hot for this story. We felt that we were really on the verge of getting something possibly very big.
So we came one evening to Bariloche. We stayed at some hotel in the outskirts of town.
We instructed the pilots of the aircraft to go undercover. I said, you guys disappear now for 24 hours. Come back and meet us here at 3 p.m. tomorrow. We should be all done by then, and we got to get Sam Donaldson out of here.
Harry Phillips had arranged for a van to take us to this hotel on a lake. We stayed there until the next morning when we started out to find the two Germans.
We were going to have 2 camera crews, at least 2 translators, myself and Sam Donaldson descending on this quiet little town. All at once, people are going to be asking questions. Who are these people? Why are they here?
The cameras were in cases, so it wasn't as if we got off an airplane with our cameramen holding their cameras on their shoulders.
When we checked into the hotel, I instructed the crew to tell everybody that we were wealthy tourists. I had just been there fishing. I was now bringing my friends back.
We didn't go out on the town. We didn't say, let's go out on the town and meet a bunch of German citizens here in Argentina and have a beer with them.
We wanted to be safe because we were going to do something very provocative, but we also wanted to succeed in what we were doing, and so we had to talk very carefully about what our schedule was going to be. We knew that he would come out at noon from his school, and we knew that we had some hours before we would need to be there, so we dedicated the first few hours to surveillance and staking out Juan Mahler's house. Even though we hadn't seen him at all, we thought we'd better spend at least 3 or 4 hours with Sam just in case he arrives.
And the next morning, we set out first to find Juan Mahler.
It was a long shot. At 7 a.m., we were out on the street in front of Juan Mahler's house. We couldn't put a camera directly in front of the house without being real obvious. So we had cameras in vans. I'm bleary-eyed because I've been up most of the night. Delilah is exhausted. Sam Donaldson, fortunately, is fresh, and our camera crew is wired, ready for something to happen. I'm just about to say we might not get anything when suddenly the gate opens in front of his house. And out steps Juan Mahler.
It is the first time any of the ABC team has set eyes on the former SS officer.
And we found him where we thought we could find him.
I knew it was him immediately, the first time I'd seen him. And I yelled out to everybody, "There he is, he's standing in the street."
All of a sudden, a taxi came.
He got in it and the taxi took off before we could do anything. So I yelled through the walkie-talkie, "Sam, he's coming your way."
And we went after his taxi.
I was terrified because I had lost sight of him. I was too far behind. We were in a panic. And fortunately, Sam was right behind him as they pulled up to a pharmacy.
And Donald said, when I say jump, all of you jump into the street.
Sam and his crew leaped out of a vehicle and approached Juan Mahler, who was exiting the pharmacy.
I was waiting on the sidewalk.
Senor Mahler, I'm Sam Donaldson of American Television, ABC News.
He introduced myself. He saw the cameras. He knew I was from American Television, and he knew that he was being videotaped.
He looked like a rat who'd been caught with the cameras on all sides.
But what do you know? What do you want?
Well, is your name Reinhard Kops?
Excuse me, but I have no time for such.
Sam was asking him, "Are you also Reinhard Kops?" And Juan Mahler said, "No, I am not."
So Harry Phillips took out a photo where you could see cops dressed up as a Nazi.
This is not a photostat of your membership in the Nazi Party.
No, never. I'd been a member of.
I kept pressing him on this, and I had his picture, and I had other identifying marks from him as Reinhard Kops, who looked like the same guy.
You are Reinhard Kops?
No.
No?
No. I was in 52. The German embassy here gave me the name.
The name of
Mahler.
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 And what was your name before Mahler?
Kops.
Kops. Your name was Kops.
Yeah. No, it's not. He was.
We got him to admit that he's Reinhard Kops. Second thing was, Sam now had to ask him, did you help Nazis leave Rome?
I pressed him on what he had done.
Have you ever heard of the rat line? Something called the rat line?
No.
And after a little bit of questioning, he admitted that too.
I know now that it was something like that, but in those times I did not know.
Now I guess he must have thought, I've got to deflect this interest in me. It was a real shock what he said next.
I was not in Yugoslavia, Albania, in the SS.
Ambushed on the street by ABC News, former SS officer Reinhard Kops is growing desperate.
There's a lot of people here still Nazi. A lot, I tell you.
Who are they?
He pulled me up the street as if to whisper to me. But I still had a microphone. I thought, wow, I don't know what he's going to say, but it's going to be very interesting.
And he whispered in Sam's ear,
His name is Priebke, P-R-E.
Priebke.
Eric Priebke.
he was nervous, he wanted out of there, he wanted to deflect attention, and so he decided to give up Eric Priebke. It was priceless. We were giddy, is the best word to describe it.
It would be hours before they could confront Priebke at the German school. How quickly could word spread?
You know, you have to realize this Nazi community in Argentina was full of rivalries and hatred. There had already been the case of Adolf Eichmann, who was kidnapped in 1960. There was also lots of rumors that went around the Nazi community in Argentina that Eichmann had been betrayed by one of his fellow Nazis as well. So it's a community where everybody was very suspicious of each other, and they all lived in fear that they would be arrested or kidnapped.
Who knows if these individuals are vindictive or whether they want to stop us or whether they feel that, you know, that we have just gotten something that could cause Reinhard Kopp to be arrested and thrown in jail. But we only had half of our work done, and we were now planning for the home run. Eric Priebke. He was our next person to go to.
The Ardeatine Caves massacre is an incredibly important fixture on the sort of Italian cultural, historical landscape.
To hide their crimes, the Nazis used explosives to seal off the caves and entomb their victims. It was only after Rome's liberation that the true horror of the massacre came to light.
The caves were opened later that year, and there's a lot of very gruesome photography taken and a lot of testimony from the archaeologists and scientists who were there who helped dig it up. It is totally emblematic of Nazi brutality.
In June 1944, the Allies entered Rome. Priebke fled north to the Italian Alps.
One day, there's a knock on the door, and the Americans have come to arrest him. They're rounding people up.
Priebke openly admitted to the Ardeatine Caves massacre his participation.
He felt it was a legitimate act of war. Following orders, it was reprisal.
Priebke spent 18 months in a number of prisoner of war camps.
He decides, after a period of time, well, I'm going to escape. So, one night, he decides that the way to get out, the weakest part of this camp, is the wire. And so he manages to cut his way out the wire with two accomplices. Priebke knows that he can't just sort of stay on the run all the time. The best way to secure a happy future for himself and his family is to emigrate.
But Priebke's future is no longer secure. 4 hours after confronting Reinhard Kops, the ABC News team stakes out the school run by the former Gestapo captain.
Dalila had done great work telling us about his daily movements. His schedule was so set that you could set your clock to it.
We knew where he was. He was at the school, at the Primo Capraro school.
Eric Priebke was supposed to be there that morning, helping with school children, helping in the classroom.
Dalila was insistent he will come out of that building at exactly 12:01. He will be punctual. On two corners, we had a van with a camera in them. We had 4 walkie-talkies. We were all in communication. But for some reason, his car was parked outside the school. So now we knew that perhaps he would get into his car and drive somewhere, meaning that we would have a very small window of opportunity to catch him. We weren't ready for the fact that his car was parked outside the school. The tension is ratcheted up. And then at precisely 12:01, he steps out of the school. All the doors fly open and we converge on him, fearful that he's going to jump into his car and drive away.
I approached him. Again, I identified myself. American television.
Senor Priebke, Sam Donaldson of American television.
Sam is running across the street yelling, "Senor Priebke!" And I'm having a heart attack because I'm thinking, speak English, please. Don't invite him to speak a foreign language.
Sam Donaldson said, "Eric Priebke?" And he turned round and smiled.
Yes, Senor Priebke. Yes.
Can we talk to you about what you did during World War II? I had no idea what he would say.
Finally, ABC News anchor Sam Donaldson is face-to-face with fugitive Nazi war criminal Eric Priebke.
I've interviewed a lot of people who have committed crimes, and they usually run when they see someone like me.
He clearly is not intimidated by us in any way.
Made no sense. Here's a man that's committed terrible crimes. Why does he want to talk to a reporter?
You were in the Gestapo in 1944, were you not? In Rome?
Yes, in Rome, yes.
Yes, I am Eric Priebke. Yes, I was in Rome.
You know, the communists blow up a group of our German soldiers.
Yes.
For every German soldier, 10 Italians had to die.
He admitted to just about everything that he did.
But why did you shoot them? They had not done anything.
You know, that was our order.
Donaldson is a man who wouldn't leave you a second without asking things. He keeps asking and asking and asking.
But orders are not an excuse.
Oh, well, at that time, order was an order, you see.
And he was getting more and more agitated. He said, we didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it, but I had to.
You were just following orders?
Yes, of course, yes. But I didn't shoot anybody.
He actually denied that he had shot anyone personally. But we had papers from a British prisoner of war camp where he had admitted shooting 2 people.
We had his confession.
You were there when they were shot, the civilians.
Yes, the first ones, yes, I saw them, yes.
And you carried it out.
I had to carry it out, yes.
And civilians died.
Civilian died, yes.
When Sam raised the idea that perhaps he was a war criminal, he was indignant.
You live in this time, but we did live in 1933. You understand that?
I asked him whether old men should pay for the crimes they commit when they're young.
You know, that was not a crime, that was a
Shooting
rebellion.
civilians in time of war is against all international
Yes,
conventions.
today, but not in this time.
I'm sure DeLillo was enraged.
I felt proud because I said, at least one. I got one.
Reporters are not supposed to be emotional on a story. We're trying to get the facts and all of this. But I did become emotional by this time.
How do you feel about the fact that 6 million Jews were executed, killed?
Yeah, no, I feel very sorry about it. Very, very sorry.
But you did it.
Many young men do things when they are old men like me now, they're very sorry about it.
And finally, I said to him, many people think you should be executed for your crimes. And at that point, you could see a bell ringing in his head. You know, is this a good idea, talking to this idiot?
You came over me right for like that. It's not a nice manner you did it. You are not a gentleman.
And he slams the door and drives away. It was a high like you only experience once in your career. We got on a phone, and the reaction from New York is, oh my God, this sounds amazing.
So I said to Harry, I think we better get out of town as quickly as we can. The worry that I had was that someone would realize that it would be advantageous to get hold of that videotape and not let it leave Bariloche. That was my worry.
ABC News have captured Nazi war criminals Reinhard Kopps and Eric Priebke on tape. It is a huge story. They can't risk losing it.
We knew that we had to get Sam out of town. And so within 2 hours of the confrontation with Priebke, we called the pilots who were hiding in Bariloche. By the time Sam got there, they were just about ready to go, and he left very quickly. It's safe to say within 6 hours of that encounter, those tapes were airborne for the United States. It was better than the best luck I ever could imagine. This is one of those moments where you just say everything went absolutely right. We knew we had a great story. That's all we knew initially.
Good evening. Tonight, we're going to tell the story of how thousands of suspected Nazi war criminals escaped justice
When we put this story in the air, what might happen to Eric Priebke was going to be the next story.
The broadcast airs 6 weeks after the 50th anniversary of the Ardeatine cave massacre.
The reaction in Argentina was an explosion of media. In Italy, the same thing happened because the Italians actually believed that all of the perpetrators of that massacre in Rome in 1944 were either dead or had been convicted.
Within days of the broadcast, Priebke is arrested.
Kops was hounded to the point where he vanished and fled the country, apparently went to Chile. And with Priebke in custody, the media went crazy with pictures and stories and full-page headlines.
It's perhaps the one story that I'm proudest of from the standpoint of making a difference that I think counts.
Italy demands that Priebke be sent back to Rome.
There was a 1.5-year tussle in the Argentine courts, but he finally was extradited to Italy to stand trial.
Giulia Spizzichino, who campaigned for his extradition, attends the trial.
He never looked at me, never, because I was always the first person who speak about him.
Priebke's brought to Rome, where he faces a military tribunal. The tribunal finds him guilty of doing what he did, but they have to set him free because he was acting under orders, that old excuse. Huge outrage that he's been set free. I mean, there's almost a riot outside the courtroom, and so he's immediately rearrested.
He appeals the verdict twice and is finally sentenced to life.
When you're over a certain age in Italy, you can't actually be sent to prison. He is now currently serving his sentence in an apartment in the center of Rome.
It made me very happy, and that was all.
I know it's difficult, but for me it's impossible to forgive, to forget.
It was a validation of the highest order, you know, to think that governments were taking action to prosecute this man based on our work.
Human nature has not yet come to the point, it seems to me, where we can all just say, forget it, these kind of atrocities will not occur again. But one way to try to prevent them is tell the story of how people who may have started out as ordinary human beings became murderers.
Mengele was known as the Angel of Death. He wanted to improve the stock of the Aryan race.
The idea was that I should go now and try to find Mengele.
He was living in fear of being arrested.
There are sightings everywhere of Mengele.
They refused to give anything up. They said, no, it's not Mengele, it's not true. They lied, they denied it.
There were many who believed that he could have staged a death.
And there still are people who think that he's alive.
Buenos Aires, 1958. The Argentinian capital's old-world charm and famed nightlife have made it a magnet for European expatriates. It is also a magnet for Nazi war criminals, fugitives like Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death.
He liked Buenos Aires, and there was a large German community, some of whom were Nazis.
He had a bit of cash, he was a man about town, and certainly he was very well connected.
He met Hans Rudel, Hitler's most decorated pilot. He met Wilhelm Sassens, who was a wanted war criminal from Belgium.
Who was still very much a passionate Nazi.
This was not a life on the run that was terrible. It was quite luxurious. And in 1958, the man that we think of as the angel of death, the most hunted man of the world, was in the telephone book in Argentina. One of the things that happens that changes everything for Mengele is that in 1959, he's indicted by the West German government.
The Auschwitz-Birkenau doctor is wanted for mass murder and also for performing unspeakably cruel medical experiments on children as young as 5. Germany demands Argentina hand him over to face justice.
And that scared him. It made him feel unsafe in Buenos Aires, and that was good, because he deserved to live in fear.
What Mengele doesn't know is that there is more to fear than just an extradition order. Israeli agents are on the hunt for Nazis in Argentina, and they've already caught one.
We took off his clothes to make sure that he doesn't got any weapon or razor blade to kill himself. I told him who we are and what we demand from him.
Adolf Eichmann, the architect of Hitler's final solution, is in Israeli hands.
After they kidnapped Eichmann, Zvi Aharoni interrogated him and said, "Where's Mengele? Where's Mengele?"
And he refused to answer about any question about us.
And Eichmann was absolutely, loyal and said, "I have no idea where he is."
In fact, the two had shared cake and coffee several times in Buenos Aires.
Eichmann and Mengele actually meet each other at the ABC Café, and they don't get on very well.
He viewed Eichmann as a lower-class officer who lived in this terrible area of Argentina, in the suburb of Buenos Aires. Mengele was more regal. He associated with intellectuals. He had the top end of the Reich. Eichmann was he was a working-class stiff at the Mercedes factory.
The Mossad interrogators apply more pressure. Finally, Eichmann cracks.
He knew that Mengele was somewhere in the Argentine, maybe in Buenos Aires, but he had no contact with Mengele.
He met him before, but he had no idea of his address and what he's doing now.
For the Mossad, Mengele is right up there with Eichmann on their most wanted list.
Mengele had the worst name in Israel than Eichmann. He was a real butcher.
Mengele's big interest was in genetics, and he wanted to look at how you could improve the stock of the Aryan race and therefore propagate a master race.
The Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp was the site of Mengele's nightmarish medical lab.
Part of his experiments were about sterilization. So to find out how they could sterilize the Eastern races, the Slavs, the Gypsies, the inferior races at a faster rate.
And he had power of life and death.
Most of Mengele's human guinea pigs perished.
The experiments get progressively worse, and by the time he leaves there, he is the monster that we've all come to know him for.
Three days after the Eichmann abduction, Agent Aitan meets with Isser Harel. The Mossad chief has some good news.
Isser Harel found the address of Mengele in Buenos Aires.
Isser Harel was very keen to think, I can bring back two. I could get Mengele as well.
The Mossad boss wants to mount a full-blown commando raid on the address.
He wanted to do a second operation while the first one wasn't finished. And this is bad thinking.
If you involve two things at the same time, you multiply the risk for failure. So I suggest not to do it.
But Harel doesn't want to miss what may be their only chance to capture the notorious doctor. He overrules his agents. Operation Mengele is on.
The Israelis actually went looking around Buenos Aires during that period in which they were holding Eichmann in the safe house.
They stake out a boarding house where they suspect Mengele is living.
That was really risky because we all traveled on false passports, on languages we didn't master.
If you were caught in Argentina in 1960 as a known foreign spy, you wouldn't have been executed, but you would have been the guest of the Argentine government for a very, very long time.
Mossad agents have tracked Nazi war criminal Joseph Mengele to what they hope is his hideout in Buenos Aires.
He sent few people to check his apartment.
And they were making pretty sort of blatant inquiries as to where he was. And they were going up to the boarding house where they thought he had lived and said, "Is this where Dr. Mengele lives?" Hoping that maybe they'd say, "Oh, don't you mean Mengele? Yes, he lives over there."
The risks were definitely the German community of Buenos Aires. There's a German community of 250,000 people then.
It is the large German community that has drawn Nazis like Eichmann and Mengele to Argentina. The country's totalitarian regime, led by Juan Perón, has made them feel right at home.
And everybody wonders, why did South America, and Argentina in particular, become the place where the Nazis came to after the war? And the truth is that there were already links between the Nazis and Argentina during the war. During the war, Perón and the Argentine government had secret agreements with Himmler's foreign espionage service. When the war ended, it was a natural extension of Argentina's role during the war for it to receive Nazis afterwards.
But he was not in the house.
Fact is that we couldn't find him. That means that he was dug in better than Eichmann.
With no sign of the Nazi doctor, Harel decides to cut his losses and return to Israel with Eichmann alone.
I'm afraid at that stage that the Mossad were on a very cold trail indeed, and Mengele had long flown the coop.
Mengele moved, not because of the Israelis, but by sheer luck to Paraguay and wouldn't be in Buenos Aires. They would miss him.
In December 1961, an Israeli court convicts Adolf Eichmann and hangs him for his crimes. But Mossad chief Isser Harel has not given up on Joseph Mengele.
Harel, though, was still determined that Mengele was someone they wanted to catch. He was a notorious figure. So Aharoni was ordered to mount an operation and to try and find him.
Senior Mossad agent Zvi Aharoni returns to South America to track down the Nazi doctor.
The idea was that I should go now and try to find Mengele.
He goes undercover as a historian, writing a book about the SS. Zvi and his agents comb Argentina, Uruguay, Bolivia, and Chile.
Some information pointed the way to Paraguay, but when we were there, he had already left.
The mission proves more challenging than even the Eichmann capture. It pushes the team to the limit. finally, after 2 years of searching, they catch a break.
They had picked up this Belgian war criminal.
He was a former Dutch SS officer called Willem Sassen.
Sassen is a former drinking buddy of Mengele.
And they said to him, we're going to take you back for war crimes unless you give us something better. He said, I'll give you Mengele.
Sassen was very much plugged into the network, and he suggested that Mengele was in Brazil. And so Aharoni and his team went there.
He said he might be hiding in a house near Sao Paulo.
But identifying the fugitive Nazi won't be easy.
He changed his name more than once and had a relatively low profile. One of his distinguishing features was this gap between his teeth, and he was nervous about that, knowing that it was an identifying feature. He grew a big, bushy mustache that effectively covered the front teeth and made it difficult for anyone to see this gap.
The team narrows their search to a ranch on the outskirts of the city. For the stakeout, Aharoni is joined by fellow agent Rafi Eitan, the man who led the Eichmann mission.
We were looking for Mengele in a farm about 50 kilometers from Sao Paulo.
The Israeli spies spend days watching the ranch. The information provided by Sassen is beginning to look like another dead end. And then
I saw a man with a mustache and two people like bodyguards watching him.
And one of them, for sure, was Mengele.
Mengele was posted to Auschwitz in May of 1943. It was only a couple of months after he turned just 32 years old.
We were loaded into cattle cars. People were praying, crying.
He's standing at the ramps when the trains pull in. He wanted to be there to select the people to the right and to the left, those who would live and those who would die.
the strongest would be chosen for slave labor. Young children, the old and the infirm, would be sent straight to the gas chambers.
And everybody understood that there was no longer any escape.
He was looking for his experiment victims. What Mengele wanted were twins.
One of the best ways of establishing how genes work is to look at identical twins.
One you do the experiments on, the other is the control you do nothing on, and you can see the changes and measure them one against the other.
He'd inject different colored pigments into their eyes.
He would use the twins to try to unlock this secret of what he viewed as the twin birth. And that involved, in some cases, the shooting of twins in the back of the head and then dissecting them as the corpses to see what was going on.
It's not like, he was just the sort of surgical murderer. He was also a brute as well.
My mother grabbed my twin sister and me by the hand, hoping that as long as she could hold on to us, that she could protect us. I, in my childish curiosity, looked around, trying to figure out what on earth is that place. Then I realized that my father and my two older sisters have disappeared in the crowd. A Nazi was running, yelling in German, "Twins, twins." We were wearing, as always, matching outfits. In this case, it was burgundy dresses. He demanded to know from my mother if we were twins. And my mother didn't know what to say. She asked if that was good. The Nazi nodded yes, and my mother said yes. I remember looking back and seeing her arms stretched out in despair as she was pulled away. I never got to say goodbye to her.
The Israelis went out and they looked at that farm, they staked it out, and Zvi Aharoni, the head of the Mossad team, told me these men walked past him, and one of them he was convinced was Mengele.
After 18 years on the run, it appears the angel of death is in the crosshairs of the Mossad. Mossad operatives believe they have sighted the world's most notorious Nazi fugitive.
I'm sure that we did see actually Mengele.
For now, the team's mission is limited to surveillance. They return to Israel to plan their next move. Agent Zvi Aharoni reports to Mossad Chief Isser Harel.
Harel didn't believe their intelligence. Aharoni said as a field agent that he felt as though the man he saw was Mengele, and that was enough, therefore, to go. But what Harel was saying to him is, guess what? This is 1961. It's now 16 years after the end of the war. You're making a visual identification based upon somebody's SS photograph, which was taken in 1938. I need more evidence.
Harel says, the operation's cancelled. We've got something else to do, and there were greater problems back at home.
Because Nasser, head of Egypt, had just fired rockets capable of hitting Israel, and German rocket scientists were down there working on them. And Isser Harel spent the next year on an assassination plot of killing off the rocket scientists.
Operation Mengele is shelved. The Mossad's Nazi hunting unit is quietly disbanded.
And Mengele lived.
But the Nazi doctor is no longer enjoying the good life.
After 1959, when he had to flee Argentina because of the extradition request, his life went into a very sharp decline.
Mengele was growing increasingly paranoid that he was going to be caught. He's living a very nervous life.
Joseph Mengele has no idea that the Mossad have given up their chase. He remains terrified that, like Adolf Eichmann, he will be kidnapped and hanged for his crimes.
He ended up on these little outback farms in the wilds of Brazil.
He does build a watchtower in one of these farms he lives in, and he uses it to sort of survey, the surrounding acres and kilometers around. That's his very commanding position. And he also had this whole pack of dogs with him. So he was a very, very paranoid, very edgy figure.
Israel may have given up the hunt, but in West Germany, prosecutors continue to build a case against Mengele.
There's a very loyal retainer of the Mengele family called Sedlmayr.
Prosecutors suspect Hans Sedlmayr has provided Mengele support since his flight from Europe.
A judge who was then running the office that would investigate Mengele decided to go ahead and swear Hans Sedlmayr in under sworn oath and question him about whether he was supporting Mengele, the family was, money was going to him, or anything else. Sedlmayr lied just through his teeth, said we'd never seen him, don't know anything about him, probably dead, don't send him a penny. And they never went out to find out anything else. They accepted his word.
Mengele's long flight is now nearly 20 years in the making.
Auschwitz is liberated in January 45, but before that happens, Mengele's made good his escape.
But he got away 10 days before the Red Army liberated the camp. It was complete and utter chaos. Tens of thousands of prisoners moving through the camps at the same time. Nobody quite sure of who was anybody.
He fled with a suitcase full of his scientific findings.
And he was picked up finally by the Americans in June of 1945. What saved him was that Mengele's vanity. when he had joined the SS, one of the things you had to do was have a blood type tattoo put under your arms.
So that if they were wounded and unconscious, they would know what kind of blood for transfusions. He was fastidious, narcissistic, and he didn't want a tattoo, apparently.
Mengele didn't want to mar his body.
So he never had that distinguishing feature of an SS man or officer, and that really helped him.
So in the days at the end of the war, and they had quite a simple litmus test. Take off your shirts, raise your hands. If they found a tattoo, they put you to one side and they would interrogate you. If there was no tattoo and you had some kind of reasonable story, then you were released, which is what happened with him.
Mengele drifted homeward through Germany.
Mengele did not go back and live openly under his own name in his hometown. He lived under an assumed name on a farm in Bavaria,
where he works for 2 to 3 years.
American investigators show up at his wife's home and say, "Do you know what happened to your husband?" And she says, "I hear he's dead on the Eastern Front," and they close the file.
But Mengele's family knows that he is alive and well. They even sent him money via Hans Sedlmayr.
He came from a very rich family. The Mengele family were a family who produced farm machinery in Germany.
The Mengele family ran the largest business in Günzburg. Günzburg was a company town.
But as long as Dr. Mengele stays in Germany, he remains at risk.
He was living in fear of being arrested. He saw what happened to, the Nazis in the Nuremberg trials, where all the Nazi leaders were tried, convicted, and executed by hanging. He knew as a former Auschwitz doctor that this could very probably be his fate if he was caught.
So he contacts his family back in Günzburg, and Sedlmayr puts him in touch with various people who can help him.
If you had enough money, you could flee.
So he crossed into Austria. From Austria, he crossed into Italy.
And like many other Nazis, he reaches Genoa.
He got an Argentine landing permit in the name of Helmut Gregor. He boarded a ship called the North King to Buenos Aires.
Mengele arrived in Argentina in August 1949. Before long, he begins selling farm machinery across South America. His business thrives.
From 49 till 59, those 10 years he spent in Argentina were actually very good years.
But after fellow SS officer Adolf Eichmann is kidnapped and indicted, Mengele's world begins to crumble.
And let me tell you, there is nothing that scared the Nazi war criminals in South America more than that indictment. It ruined everybody's day, and it especially ruined Mengele's.
He's just going from a succession of farms, being an itinerant farm manager, effectively, in Paraguay, in Brazil. And at one point when he was on a farm in Brazil, there was a young calf, had a hernia. And Mengele got out his surgical tools and performed this incredibly delicate and successful operation on removing this hernia. And the farm workers realized that actually, you're not just some Swiss farm manager you claim to be. You're something else.
Though the Mossad has failed to capture him, Mengele's carefree life is gone for good.
So Mengele grows increasingly isolated, depressed, and he ends up in a very modest bungalow on the outskirts of Sao Paulo.
Ironically, as Mengele's fortunes dwindle, his legend grows increasingly outlandish.
Throughout the late 60s and early 70s, the reputation of Mengele grows out of all proportion. It's partly fueled by Simon Wiesenthal, who has kind of made Joseph Mengele his sort of poster boy. This is the Nazi we all want to capture. This is the really bad one. This is Angel of Death.
Private individuals such as Simon Wiesenthal, the Klarsfelds in Paris, they were the ones who were keeping the flame alive.
We had known that Mengele was living in Paraguay, and that's the reason I demonstrated it in front of the Ministry of Justice in order to get information about the fate of Mengele.
The Klarsfelds did try to look for him, but probably a bit too late in the day. And a lot of people remained absolutely convinced that Mengele was in Paraguay all the way through the late 60s and 70s. And in fact, he had left Paraguay.
Everyone had this notion of Mengele living in some jungle fortress with, dogs yapping at his boots and cigarette boats out on the river and minions following him around.
You've got the Mengele of popular culture, boys from Brazil, the white suit, the all-powerful Nazi hiding in the jungle, the real stuff of myth.
We thought Hollywood was doing documentaries instead of films.
It turns out he lived a fairly squalid life.
And he's got this terrible nervous habit of chewing the ends of his moustache. And he chews his moustache so much that he ends up with a hairball. His paranoid nature gets worse and worse. He's not a Nazi hiding in the jungle with a huge estate. He's a little old man with a hairball.
40 years have passed since the fall of the Third Reich. But Joseph Mengele, doctor of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, remains at large.
There are sightings everywhere of Mengele, saying that he was in southern Spain, he was an island in Greece, he was in a Paraguayan jungle with a great big factory, he was everywhere but the moon, frankly. But no one was really hunting for him.
If there had been any serious effort, particularly by the German government, to find these criminals, it would have been extremely easy to find them and locate them and have them arrested.
This was a Nazi war criminal living in South America, communicating regularly with his family and getting money from them. And all they had to do was look at the mail, and they never did it.
I trusted the government of the world to do the right thing, until I realized that they were covering up on left and on right.
In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Eva Kor leads a small group of survivors to the concentration camp they were sent to as children. From Auschwitz, they travel to Jerusalem, where they hold a 3-day mock trial of Dr. Mengele. 106 victims line up to testify against their Nazi tormentor.
I would say that it's probably the closest thing to making feel a person like an animal, like a nothing, like a piece of garbage or a piece of meat.
He would come every morning immaculately dressed. I remember his black, gleaming boots.
He had this white coat, and he was handsome, and he wore the uniform. He was this immensely powerful figure.
I was injected with something that made me very ill.
He would deliberately infect them to see how long the infection would take in one and not the other.
I had extremely high fever. My arms, my legs were swollen to twice the size, with huge red patches all over. Painful, very painful.
Mengele's twisted desire to create an Aryan master race led to torturous experiments on more than 3,000 twins. 200 survived.
So when Mengele came in with the 4 other doctors, and he looked at the fever chart, and he declared, laughing sarcastically, "Too schwer, too young, 2 Wochen to labor. Too bad. She's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live." That much I understood in German.
Against the odds, Eva and her sister Miriam lived to see the Red Army's liberation of Auschwitz. The rest of their family perished.
To me, it seemed like a nightmare, that somehow if I could close my eyes and open them up again, the whole nightmare would disappear. But the nightmare did not disappear.
In 1985, campaigning by Eva Kor and others converges with political will.
The pressure is building on the German government, on the Americans, on the Israelis because of this mock trial. There started to be multi-million-dollar rewards offered for Mengele.
Law enforcement officials from 3 nations meet to coordinate their efforts.
The Germans were the hosts. There were several people from different agencies in Israel, and the U.S. Marshal Service was there.
Days later, the international team decides to act on a promising tip. After drinking heavily at a restaurant, Mengele's fixer, Hans Zettelmeyer, let it slip to a friend that he's been supporting Mengele for years. The friend alerted authorities. The chief prosecutor in Frankfurt secures a search warrant for Zettelmeyer's home.
Zettelmeyer was always considered to be a potential link to Mengele in South America.
The hunt for the Nazi doctor moves into high gear. May 31st, 1985. German special agents raid the home of Mengele family fixer Hans Zettelmeyer.
They knew that if they told the local Bavarian police, there was bound to be an informer for the Mengele family who would then tip them off and, make sure they hid everything. So they got a different police force from another part of the country to go and raid Zettelmeyer's property.
The search was conducted by the Bundeskriminalamt, which is the German federal police.
They do this search. He thinks he's safe. It's only by luck, when they move this large sort of armoire cabinet, that they find something.
Behind the furniture, investigators unearth a secret stash of envelopes.
There they found these letters that had been sent from Mengele.
They found everything. All the letters, all the addresses of his helpers.
Long had been rumored the fact that Zettelmeyer's wife had a crush on Joseph Mengele early on. And Mengele had letters to her directly as well as to Hans Zettelmeyer.
Among the cache of letters, investigators find one that includes a stunning revelation. With deep sorrow, I tell you of the death of our common friend.
That led the Germans to believe that Mengele had died in Brazil in 1979.
Zettelmeyer is arrested. A search of his address book links Mengele to a residence in Sao Paulo. David Marwell, an investigator with the U.S. Justice Department, is part of the international force now hunting Mengele.
The Germans, after the discovery of the documentation in the Zettelmeyer home, went directly to Sao Paulo.
Brazilian police are brought on board.
Romeo Tuma was the captain who ran the Brazilian investigation for the federal police. He received the material from the Germans.
Tuma quickly determines who lives at the Sao Paulo address. A German family called the Bosserts.
They're not quite so genteel about a search warrant. They really do come in with full force.
Police question them about their suspected link to Mengele.
And they refused to give anything up. They said, no, it's not Mengele, it's not true. They lied, they denied it.
But Tuma soon finds a makeshift shrine to Mengele and a stash of his personal writing and photographs. The truth about one of the era's most enduring mysteries is finally revealed.
And finally they gave it up.
The family admit to sheltering Mengele during the last 4 years of his life.
And then they said where he was dead, and then where they had buried him. Mengele is buried just outside on the outskirts of a common cemetery where paupers are generally buried.
and they dug up a 6-year-old corpse.
News of Mengele's death attracts a media throng to the gravesite.
And there was Mengele's skull for everybody to see, and it was kind of held up for the cameras in a rather grisly way, and snap, snap, snap.
But questions linger.
There were many who believed that he could have staged a death, and he had the requisite medical knowledge and clearly the motive to stage a death.
Because he had this diabolical reputation, because he had this image that he was this cunning scientist beyond, any form of natural justice, he was, this was all just some cunning thing. Even though Mengele's bones had been dug up, a lot of people thought that Mengele was still alive.
An international task force from Germany, Brazil, Israel, and America believe they have found Joseph Mengele. Forensic scientists must now prove the exhumed corpse really is the Nazi doctor.
We put together a top-flight team of pathologists and of radiologists and dental experts. The Israelis sent down the chief pathologist of the Israeli Defense Force. The forensic experts set out to compare what they knew about the living Mengele with what evidence could be derived from the skeletonized remains.
So they had compared the skull to a picture of Mengele's face, and they blended the two together. So it's very eerie, but very compelling as a piece of evidence.
We spent a great deal of time examining the bones that were discovered in this grave, and I am absolutely confident that the bones were Joseph Mengele's.
But for undeniable proof, they would have to wait for the advent of a new forensic technology.
There was a lot of room for the doubters to think that actually maybe he's, still around. Maybe this is all a fix. And it did take really genetic testing in the early 90s to fundamentally prove to people that these were indeed Mengele's bones.
Science caught up with the Mengele case. Bones from Brazil were sent to a laboratory in England. They were ground, and they were able to collect a tiny amount of DNA, enough to analyze it.
The results are definitive. The bones are Joseph Mengele's.
There he was dead.
The hunt for Joseph Mengele is over. The full details of how he died are revealed.
Mengele's death was, in many ways, pitiful, and it was kind of the pitiful death that he deserved. With some friends, he was taken down to Bertioga Beach, which is about 20 or 30 miles just south of Sao Paulo, and they sat in their sort of beach house they had, a little beach house. They persuaded him, look, why don't you go out for a swim? Mengele always refused to go outside because, I don't like the sun, and also he thought he might be spotted by someone. And he eventually said, okay, I will. Current was very, very strong, as it is round there.
On this hot summer day, Mengele swam out from the beach a little bit further than he should have.
And it became quite apparent within a few minutes that he was in trouble. Tried to resuscitate him. He'd had a stroke. And if you have a stroke while you're swimming, the combination isn't great.
And he dies in the water, either from drowning or from the stroke itself.
The interesting thing is that after his death, they talked about whether they should cremate him. They couldn't get anyone in the Mengele family to sign off on it. They wanted to cremate the remains. If they had done that, nobody today, including me, would think he's dead.
The world's most notorious Nazi fugitive would never answer for his crimes.
They would have loved to have had that trial for the historical record for Mengele. The victims deserved that, and that was frustrating for the Mossad.
Israel sometimes apologizes why he didn't succeed to bring Mengele into trial. When I write my memory, I'm not going to apologize.
There's no punishment for a fellow like Mengele. Even if he's caught and he's executed, the second at the end of the hangman's noose isn't justice for what he did. But there is some justice in that after the Eichmann kidnapping, he is really a bitter, depressed, unhappy man. That gives me great satisfaction.
I think in many ways I feel sorry for people like Joseph Mengele, because they had a twisted idea of what is right and what is wrong. I don't believe that the perpetrators escaped scot-free. I think they lived a miserable life filled with guilt.
If you're looking for shards of justice in all of this, he didn't lead the life that many fantasized he did. This was not a comfortable life.
Mengele died an old man. And the hell with him.